Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to take another look at our fundamentals demo, and specifically, we are going to take another look at our registrant class. In this video, we are going to add a couple of methods that will allow for us to extend the functionality of our registrant class. And particularly what we're going to do is we're going to modify or change the behavior of our toString and create two additional functions called toCSV and toCustom. Now, we're not going to change our toString necessarily, but we're going to use them as a model for how we can provide alternate formats for our registrant to be displayed or possibly stored persistently. And so ultimately, the idea here is that we want to come up with better ways of storing the information that is in our object in a more persistent or presentable fashion. And so to begin with, what we want to do is go ahead and go down to where your toString method is. And we'll simply add now a couple of functions using this toString method as a template, if you would. We're going to call the first one toCustom, much like we did in an earlier video. And the idea is that it's just supposed to provide some sort of custom format that can be stored in a file. And so in this case, it's again going to have a java.lang.string return type. And we're going to call this one toCustom. And for convenience, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage a java.lang.string local variable that we're simply going to call results, and we're going to initialize it to empty quotes. And then we will build up this results based on the individual fields that we ultimately wish to display. Now, you could argue to begin with that we have our toString, so what would we necessarily want to do differently? Well, a good example is the status of the object. In other words, whether it is complete, incomplete, or unknown might be something that you don't necessarily want to be stored persistently or displayed in certain scenarios. In other words, that's more of a system variable, has to do with the state of the object, etc. And so this might be a great opportunity for you to sort of control then what your user sees when they call your object, or in this case, try to call a toString, or in this case, a toCustom method for your object. And so it gives you a little more or additional control over what is displayed to the user. Again, though, we're going to go ahead and include the username. And at this point, you can decide various things about the format. In other words, I've followed the same format as our toString using a colon and a space. However, that is also not required. This is where you have a little more additional control, or can make some changes, if you would, to the format. To keep it simple, though, we're going to go ahead and duplicate most of what's already in our toString. And effectively, what we're going to do is we're simply going to ignore the status so that we have at least somewhat of a difference between the two. And then at this point, we simply return our results. Again, the purpose of the toCustom is really to show you that you have more control or different control by virtue of having a different function. And at this point, you can decide whatever format you would like to use. Along those same lines, we'd also like to create a second function. Again, it's going to have public java.lang.toString as its return type. And we are going to call this one toCSV. Again, we're going to leverage a local string results variable, which we're going to initialize to empty quotes. And this time around, we're going to change the structure slightly in that we are going to separate our fields by commas, and we're also not going to provide the metadata associated with the columns themselves or the fields themselves. In other words, we're not going to have a hard-coded username, first name, and so on. We're just going to focus on the raw data, but we're again going to use our results variable, and we are just going to append this .username followed by a comma, sorry, missed my plus there, and results plus equals this dot first name this dot last name this dot guest count and then the last piece is the this dot active. And now we reach a dilemma. In other words, do we want to include the new line at the end? Well, the answer is it depends on how you plan on using this particular toCSV. The idea here is that if it were to be written to a file, then you don't have to worry about the new line at the end of a line. Or you have to do that in the function that ultimately writes to the file. So again, you have your choice here. So optionally include the new line. And then ultimately you want to return your results. Now I seem to have a typo here. Give me 1 second. Not immediately seeing where our problem is. All right, let's see if I'm missing it here. Let's go ahead and build it, see exactly. No, where is our problem here? So in this particular case, unlike in our toCustom, we don't start off with a string. And so in this particular case here, you'll notice here that we start off with a Boolean, and it is attempting to add a Boolean or binary value to a character value. In this case, what we would want to do is we want to leverage then the system.lang or java.lang Boolean. And what we want to do is we want to use the toString method that will allow for us to convert an existing Boolean to a string and then append our optional new line. And so this is probably a great opportunity for us to see how to do this also with a integer. You have the ability then to call this integer.toString that will allow for you to convert our this.guest count. And so in both cases here, we are going to explicitly convert our integer and Boolean to strings. And then the last function that we want to add here, just so that you can see how you could actually create yet another function that would leverage different formats, we'll have a public java.lang.string toFormat, and then we will provide as a input argument to this a format, and we will again use a java.lang.get string results, set it equal to empty quotes, return the results. But then what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of logic inside of here. We're going to take a look at the format itself. And if we have a match to, for instance, toCustom, we're simply going to leverage this by saying results are equal to, and we're going to use our own toCustom method. This is supposed to be true. Sorry about that. Switched over to C. And then else if format dot equals ignore case, toCSV. If that is equal to true, then we simply say results are equal to toCSV. And then under the else, you can decide, do you want to check to see if they passed toString explicitly, or you simply say results are equal to whatever the toString method returns. Now, alternatively, with this approach, you can also leverage the format as a specifier using, for instance, %s, %d, etc., much like you would have done in printf. So you've got a couple of options here with this particular overload. Again, or rather method, you can leverage the different formats to display your data more dynamically in different ways. So let's see how this works. We'll come over here to our fundamentals demo. We're going to go ahead and create another option here with our registrant. The difference being that we're going to call this one, instead of a demo, we're going to leverage the to methods. And then what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and create another method, public static void. We'll call this one Registrant.to. Again, you can combine this in with your registrant demo if you'd like to. We'll need to have a EE333 registrant that we're simply going to call Registrant_01. We're not going to initialize it or call the constructor yet. We'll do that in the second step inside of a try-catch block. And again, we're simply going to print out whatever happens as a result of our exception using the toString method from the exception. And then in here, we'll say Registrant_1 is going to be equal to new EE333 registrant. And we'll test one of the overloads that we've not had a chance to test yet. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use that last overload where we have to provide more information, including the username, the first name, last name, and then the number of guests. And I'm going to include 2 here. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to see then the various formats here. So system.out.println. I'm going to go ahead and start with a nice border here. Go ahead and use it a couple of times. And then sandwiched in between each one of these borders, I want to make the calls to the various toStrings or two functions that we've created, starting with the classic. Sorry, we're going to leverage our registrant here, _1.toString. It is an instance method. We want to follow this up then with a call to our toCustom to see the difference. We can also leverage our toCSV. And then the one other scenario that we might as well go ahead and test is to see what happens when we pass it to or make a call to our toFormat. And we specify then one of our chosen formats. In this case, we're just going to duplicate the toCSV call. At this point, let's build it. We'll come out here to the command line. We'll change it from our demo to our to, and actually, I don't believe we've wired this up yet. No, we've not. In our branch here of our if statement, we simply make then a call to our EE333 FundamentalsDemo.Registrant.to build it. And then let's run this one more time. And you can see here the various formats, starting off with our original toString. Again, with our custom, notice that's different is that we do not include the status in the custom. In the toCSV, you'll see that it's just separated by commas. You'll also note that we've converted our integer into a string, as well as our Boolean into a string. And then again, we see another call to the toCSV by virtue of the toFormat. Now, the toFormat method at this point is probably slightly excessive, just allows for additional flexibility. Also, you'll notice that in both our toString, our toCustom, and our toCSV, we have added a new line. And you can see here that we are using our println function, which also adds a new line, which results in this extra new line that we're seeing. Now, you got a couple of ways that you can get around it. One, you could make a pretty strong argument that you don't need the new line at the end of each one of these methods. That's perfectly fine. The other approach that you can take is you can also simply do a system.out.print with no new line attached to it. And you can accomplish the same thing without having that second new line printed. And so again, it just depends on where do you want to place the responsibility for the new line. Again, come out here. We'll see that that last one doesn't have the extra new line on it. Case, the point to be made is you don't necessarily want to do it in both places. So as always, hopefully you found this video useful. If you've got any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you for watching.